Critique of Pure Reason by Immanuel Kant. So, when it comes to philosophy, this book, you might say, is the big one. Not only because it is quite sizable physically, but also because of the size of its influence. Um, Depending on who you ask, Critique of Pure Reason is possibly the most important work of philosophy ever written, certainly at least of modern times. And its author, Immanuel Kant, is, for that reason, regarded by many as being the most important modern philosopher, if not the most important philosopher ever. And I had read so much about this book for so long. I tried to familiarize myself with its concepts, try to see what it was about in summary, but at last I thought it was high time that I finally read the actual book myself in totality. So I did. And it is the hardest thing that I have ever read. Now, if you followed my channel, you may know that prior to this, the hardest thing I had ever read was also another work of philosophy, this book right here, Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus by Ludwig Wittgenstein. However, this book knocked this out of the top spot as the hardest thing I've ever read. But I want to say to anyone out there who may be interested in giving this book a read themselves, do not feel bad if you find this book impenetrable and very, very difficult, because it is not, or at least probably not entirely, your fault that this book is so difficult. Because, to put it simply, Critique of Pure Reason is in many ways a very, very, very badly written book, or rather, a very, very, very badly communicated book. But I will talk about that. So, the Critique of Pure Reason by Immanuel Kant is an undertaking to determine and understand the true nature of human reason, and also thereby to ascertain its limits. Kant is also the founder of Transcendental idealism, but all of that we're going to talk about, or at least I'm going to talk about it as to the best of my abilities. I'll talk about it as best I can, to say what I got out of this book, what I understood of it. So yeah, let's dive right in. Join me, won't you, as I do my damnedest to expound upon Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. So, it should be noted before approaching this book that Critique of Pure Reason is essentially in conversation with the work of prior philosophers, most prominently Hume and Leibniz. So you might want to familiarize yourself with some of their work and ideas before tackling this, or you might kind of be lost a little bit. Hume's work I was passingly familiar with. Leibniz less so, but I was kind of able to just hang in there through sheer force of will. But anyway, so the intellectual milieu in which Immanuel Kant was writing was one divided kind of in with a schism between two different schools of thought. Empiricism and rationalism. Now, empiricism, which was championed by David Hume, is a school of thought which says that the only valuable information that we can have as humans is that which is empirical, that is, which can be corroborated with something which is observably and demonstrably true in the world. Conversely, rationalism states that there exists information and knowledge which can be ascertained without corroboration of anything tangible that we can know a priori. And this is kind of the distinction between these two, is that rationalism deals largely with a priori information, that is, a priori knowledge, I should say. That is, knowledge which is gotten through logical deduction and which is known kind of analytically, whereas empiricism deals with a posteriori knowledge, which is knowledge gained only through the corroboration with tangible reality. So we have two different kinds of propositions which we can work with, or so it was thought before Kant hit the scene. We have analytic propositions and synthetic propositions. An analytic proposition is one in which the veracity or inveracity is contained in the very nature of the concepts proposed. An example of an analytic proposition would be: it is true that a square contains 4 right angles. That is apparently true, and it is a priori true because you don't have to go any farther than the base proposition to determine its truth or falseness. If it does not have 4 right angles, it is not a square. That is an analytic proposition. But a synthetic proposition is one which has to be corresponded with a posteriori knowledge. So an example of a synthetic proposition would be: Little Rock is the capital of Arkansas. You cannot know the truth or falseness of this without doing some research, without corroborating it to actual physical external reality. But what Kant proposes in the Critique of Pure Reason is that this is a false dichotomy, that there exists a third way, or rather a third branch of knowledge, which he denotes as synthetic a priori knowledge. That is, knowledge which is known a priori, intuitively, but which also involves the marriage of more than one concept, which previously was thought to only be possible with a posteriori knowledge, but Kant says this is not true. So we have to understand how Kant sees the human mind as being constituted. So one of the most revolutionary and kind of contentious things that Kant puts forward is that space and time are pure intuitions of the human intellect. That time is our innate inner sense, whereas space is the way that we intuit external objects. As an example to show the truth of this, try, if you can, to imagine the lack of space and time. It cannot be done. You cannot ideate a lack of dimension and duration. It just doesn't work like that. Space and time are programmed into your very mind. They are the baseline workings of your mind. They are pure intuitions. But from this, Kant says that we are able to synthesize within our minds information purely a priori. Now, this goes into mathematics as well, because mathematics is a priori knowledge, but it also involves synthesis. And again, prior to this book, people thought that synthetic propositions had to be corroborated with a posteriori, after the fact knowledge. But Kant illustrates why this isn't so, and he uses mathematics as an example. Because mathematics is, again, a priori. You don't have to go any farther than numbers to verify the truth or falseness of a mathematical equation, but mathematics is still a synthetic form of knowledge. As he gives as an example in this, he uses the proposition 7 plus 5 equals 12. Now, again, this is purely a priori because we all know that 7 plus 5 equals 12. But the reason why this is synthetic is because 12 is not contained in either 7 or 5. It is only contained in the conjunction of these two concepts. 7 and 5 are two entirely different concepts, but when they are married together, then you can get 12. So what Kant has basically disproven is that that really was a false dichotomy, that some knowledge can be obtained both a priori and synthetically at the same time, and that space and time are the intuitive features of all reality to us. And that, again, with mathematics, geometry is an intuitive form of mathematics because it deals with space, right? It's kind of like if I give you a blank piece of paper, right? And I tell you to draw me whatever shape on it, a circle, a triangle, a dodecahedron, whatever it is, you can do that because by its very blankness, the paper already contains the potential for all shapes. And what Kant postulates with Critique of Pure Reason is that we are able to intuit the forms of things that we perceive because the potential for them is already contained in our pure intuition of space and time. So that's just, that's kind of like can throw you for a loop if you haven't really ever thought about it that way. But anyway, so going off of that, which is denoted in the book as the transcendental aesthetic, which is where Kant lays out how we are able to intuit the forms of things using space and time. He further goes on in what he calls the transcendental analytic to show how our minds are able to further construct reality via a collection of ingrained categories. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, if it wasn't already, because it shows just how much, that is, all of it, of the reality that we perceive is the creation of our minds. So Kant understood that beyond just time and space, our minds are pre-programmed with certain fundamental categories which allow us to make sense of the kind of chaos that we perceive. These include, there's like 12 of them, I think. I can't even remember all of them. But they have to do with like unity and plurality, inherence, as well as certain modal concepts such as necessity and contingency. But the one that stands out the most, and the one that he makes the most of in this book, is causality. And this is where the matrix really gets broken, because David Hume had proposed that causality is entirely fictitious, that there is no real like logical necessity in connecting an effect with a cause. That's just our minds doing that cause and effect only really exist in our mind. And Kant says yes, but that has to be for anything to be to us, if that makes sense. What he says is, I think. I want to just asterisk everything in this video with I think, because there's just so much in this book that I don't know if I was interpreting correctly. But I think what he's saying is that causality does exist in the human mind, but it is necessary for reality to present itself to us. What we behold in reality is basically just a conjunction of events. Of instances of things, just a series of things. But the putting together of those things occurs in our minds. That is to say, a glass of water and a spilled glass of water are two entirely separate things, but our minds connect those and make one be predicated upon the other. And thus we create a coherency out of what is fundamentally kind of disconnected. But this leads kind of into Kant's thesis of transcendental idealism. Now, this is the part of the book that, for me, held the greatest interest. What Kant had to say about the fundamental nature of reality as regards its relationship to us. So, Kant divides reality into two different zones: the noumenal reality and the phenomenal reality. Now, the phenomenal reality is everything that we perceive, and moreover, it is everything that we create. It is everything you see, hear, touch, taste. It's everything that is coherently put together in your mind. Now, noumenal reality is reality in itself without our perception of it, and obviously, or it should be obviously, since it would be without our perception, we cannot thereby know what true ultimate noumenal reality is. All that we ever know is our perception. But here is where it gets really intriguing, or at least it did for me. Um, Kant really makes a point of trying to refute the idealism of like Berkeley, where he just says everything is a product of the mind, nothing really exists outside the mind, everything is mental. Kant says that's not true. But here's the cool thing. Um, it has to do with the subject-object relationship. Everything that we perceive as reality is our perceptions. Your mind literally creates the reality that you know. Now, there is obviously some kind of external reality, but you don't know what that really is in itself. You only know your own knowledge of it. But here's where it gets really interesting. The subject creates the object. That is to say, because your mind is pre programmed with intuitions such as space and time, as well as the different categories such as causality and necessity or contingency, your mind literally creates reality, right? But at the same time, you have to have a reality to create in your mind. There's some really good discussion in here that Kant goes into about trying to determine the nature of the I, of the self. And what he comes to the conclusion of, as well, actually, is what in this book as well, in Wittgenstein's book, he came to the same conclusion. You cannot locate yourself except in relation to other things. That is, the subject only exists in relation to objects, but the objects only exist because a subject exists to literally give form to them. And this is, again, if I'm interpreting this right, I think, when I put that asterisk there, this is kind of a more kind of rational, philosophical, intensively philosophical validation of what is known in Eastern schools of thought, like Buddhism, as codependent origination. That there isn't really a distinction between subject and object, but that these things create each other. That is why it's called transcendental idealism, because it transcends one or the other. That there is no object without a subject, but there is no subject without an object. These things are inherently intertwined with each other, and that really it's just the matrix is just getting broken all over the place in this book. It really can blow your mind if you've never really thought about it that hard or that deeply. And that was where the most interest, I think, for me lay in just how necessary you are to create the reality that you know. Very, very interesting stuff. But after that, Kant goes into into dealing with certain more traditional philosophical issues, such as free will, the nature of the universe, the nature or potential nature of God, as well as morality. And these are things that meant a lot to Kant. But I want to say this: part of the reason why Kant is such an influential and important philosopher is because even though he was quite devout himself, he was Christian, he was a believer. He nevertheless still had the intellectual integrity to remove himself enough to look at things objectively, and make certain pronouncements about about the lack of ability to make a conclusive argument for certain things, such as God. But in what he calls the antinomies of pure reason, he illustrates how reason can be used incorrectly to formulate arguments that are seemingly sound both for and against these things, such as God or the nature of the universe, whether it was created or whether it has always been, etc. And the conclusions that Kant reaches is that you can't say anything conclusively, basically, because you have to recognize that you are applying your own criteria to the noumenal reality, which you cannot know. And this is it can maybe seem kind of disheartening, I guess, especially for like apologetics and stuff, who they kind of rely on being able to present seemingly logically sound arguments for like the existence of God, especially with like Leibniz, because Leibniz was like, I don't know why any of y'all are still confused about it. I've proved that God exists. And Kant is like, no, you haven't proved anything because you can't. And the important thing to remember is that when you're talking about the nature of God, that if there is a God, and you cannot say conclusively again whether there is or whether there is not, because you're using your own criteria, what's already ingrained in your own mind, to make these statements. But if there is a God, that God would have to, by necessity, exist outside of the world. What Kant says is that whenever people make pronouncements such as God is the uncaused cause, you're basically just kind of talking nonsense, because we can only conceive of reality as being causal, as effects proceeding from causes, and those causes in turn being the effects of prior causes, etc. You cannot really conceive of anything that isn't caused. So when you say that God is the uncaused cause of everything, you're kind of like, it's beyond your ken to even say that kind of thing. But moreover, if you can conceive of it, it's not God, because as Kant says, it's your criteria, such as cause and effect and eternality, etc., that you're applying to whatever. But since that is the case, you're by doing that with the concept of God, you are thereby stripping from God what would be necessary for God to be God. That is to say, you have to just recognize the fact that you can't say anything conclusively about God or the nature of the universe. Well, I will say he does make some pretty damn fine arguments for free will and how we can conceive of a concept of freedom that is something that is exempt from the laws of nature, that nonetheless operates concurrently with the laws of nature. But also, he goes into a lot of discussion of like morality. And another reason why Kant is such an influential and important thinker is because he was, I don't know if he was the first, but he was certainly among the first thinkers to untie the concept of morality from the concept of divinity, while all the while maintaining a strong and firm deontological position, which is very important because, just going off script here, is as though there was a script at all to begin with, but just to go off script a little bit, it's very important that right and wrong, that ethics, that morality be self-justifying, that we do not conceive of what is right and what is wrong as being in any way connected with consequence or effect. Utilitarianism is a very, very dangerous thing, and utilitarian ethics are, to put it bluntly, no ethics at all. for right and wrong to be right and wrong, for morality to be moral, these things have to be self-justifying. They have to stand or fall on and of themselves. And Kant knew that, but the important thing is that he disconnected morality from the concept of God, but while still maintaining a strong deontological standpoint, and that's very, very important. It is, but yeah. So that's what I got out of Critique of Pure Reason by Immanuel Kant. This was a headache to read. This was again the most dense and arduous thing I have ever read. There were entire sections in this book, I mean lengthy sections, where I was just reading words, just like nodding and smiling, like, yep, don't have a damn clue what you're saying. But I was just hanging in there. And needless to say, I had to consult some outside references to kind of make sense of some of this book. And that is because, like I said at the beginning, this is in many ways a very, very badly written book. Kant is kind of notorious for his very, very prolix style of writing. And it did not need to be this way. It did not serve his ideas well at all to write the way that he did. And really, his manner of philosophical writing, I think, kind of snowballed down through the ages until you get later philosophers, later German philosophers at that, like Hegel and Heidegger, where it's like, what in the ever loving hell are you even saying? Like, it's just reading their stuff is just like reading gibberish. This was not like reading gibberish, but it was very, very difficult, and it was needlessly difficult. That's the thing. So I'll say at this point right now, I'm not going to rate Critique of Pure Reason, just like with Tractatus Logico Philosophicus. I didn't give this book a rating because I don't think that's fair to it. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to extend the same courtesy to Critique of Pure Reason. But I do want to say that this book could have been written so much better, because while the concepts and the ideas in this book are quite complex, the manner of their communication is overly complex. It is overly so. He never fails to write like 10 pages for what could have just been said in like a paragraph or two, and it's so needlessly and overly verbose that you just get lost in these endless sentences that just say so much more than they have to. It's kind of just like you lose the thread, you lose the plot when you're reading this. So it is very, very difficult. But nonetheless, this work is brilliant. It is. The insights which Kant was able to give into the workings of the human mind and the limits of human reason and just how far we can take that, especially in relation to things such as God or the nature of the universe. Very, very important. And I will say this: Kant. It's kind of such a unique perspective in this book, because these concepts such as morality and free will and God were so important to Kant because he was quite devout himself. But at the same time, he had to recognize that you're just fumbling in the dark when you're trying to talk about these things largely, but that he does not in any way advocate, as I think some later philosophers probably did, of abandoning these things. Kant says it is very, very helpful and is very, very conducive to making sense of the world to believe that a God exists, that there is a higher power behind everything. It's just that you can't say to a 100% certainty that that is the case. But as he says in the book, by all means, there are lots of benefits to believing that, and you may be right in the end. You can't, again, when it comes to arguing for or against the existence of God, you're stuck basically at zero. No matter what any Christian apologist would have you believe, or any dogmatic atheist would also have you believe. You can't go forward or back. You're just kind of stuck at zero. But that's no reason not to believe whatever you would believe. It's just kind of an interesting perspective here because Kant was quite devout, but also intellectually um, integrous enough to recognize where we really stand as people in regards to these things. But yeah, these ideas, these concepts were and still can be quite mind blowing. The fact that space and time exist in us as pure intuitions, as well also how causality and these categories of our understanding are literally necessary for the creation of reality as we know it, because it's the reality we know. It's just, again, it can be quite mind blowing. Brilliant concepts, sorely lacking in communication skills, but this book is one of the most influential and important things ever written. So yeah, even though I'm not going to give it a rating because that's not fair to it, because there's still so much of it that I'm sure I just don't understand. Nonetheless, it's this is one of the most, again, important things ever written. So, Critique of Pure Reason by Immanuel Kant. Have you read Critique of Pure Reason? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you got out of it. Um, whether you agree or disagree with any of what Kant says or anything I've said today. If you haven't read Critique of Pure Reason, I could recommend this with great discretion. It is no easy feat. It is physically large, very, very dense. You kind of do just get lost sometimes in his arguments. But nonetheless, if you have any interest in philosophy, or you just want to kind of, you know, see exactly what your boundaries are in terms of argumentation for certain concepts, as well as the way that we acquire knowledge, and also the way that we quite literally construct the reality that we perceive. Definitely give it a go. But again, you might want to familiarize yourself with um, the work of certain other thinkers before you tackle this. And you may need to consult, as I certainly did, some outside references to really get some of it. But yeah, Critique of Pure Reason. As always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.